So we have Orion, constellation associated with Nimrod. Nimrod, Orion, and the mystery of Babylon. Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. Few words in the Bible have excited so much interest or speculation. Many have speculated on true identity of this king, trying to match him up with numerous Assyrian, Babylonian, and even Egyptian kings. To this date, however, his true identity remains a mystery. Nimrod, a descendant of Cush, the son of Noah, who rose head and shoulders above the rest to be the first great dictator of the post-flood world. Nimrod, besides being a mighty hunter, was also known as both a conqueror and builder of cities in the world after the Great Flood. In the eastern part of the region, formerly known as Assyria, now generally known as the ancient Near East, all over the ancient Near East, and perhaps throughout the entire world, legends state that Nimrod went far and wide conquering and to conquer the barbarians that surrounded ancient Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, on all sides, and building various cities in order to bring civilization to the face of the earth. He was the great civilizer of mankind, raising the standards of living for all under his domain. Yet despite the positive aspects of his rule, the myths and legends that have circulated ever since about this mysterious king tell the tale of a man who was also possessed of a dark side. To be free of God's rule was his dark obsession, and in order to accomplish his dark purpose, he spoke dark sentences to enslave mankind to the ring of his dark will. So Nimrod was first to renew the rebellion against God in the world after the flood. Part of this rebellion may have been his refusal to dwell in the lands allotted to the descendants of Ham, instead settling upon his own kingdom apart from the authority of God, in a place of his choosing, ignoring God's prime directive to be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, Genesis 1:28, to spread over the entire face of the earth. Nimrod instead centralized power in Mesopotamia in a bid for world supremacy, in an attempt to rule over mankind in God's seed as a self-appointed steward, a bit like King Charles. Nimrod's marching orders from his fallen masters was to recreate the world as it had been before the flood, which he did with great gusto. Like the giants of the antediluvian world, he was a superb hunter and warrior, so superior that his name became synonymous with military prowess of the hunting of both man and beast. However, his true quest was not merely a glorious hunt for animals or even the conquest of nations, but to uncover the past glories of the antediluvian world that had been destroyed and covered up by the flood. These glories of technological achievements would then be reused to rebuild the antediluvian world back to the level it had achieved before it had been destroyed by God's judgment. So we know that Nimrod's the mighty hunter. So Orion was a titan for Greek mythology, a mighty hunter. He was also a mighty warrior. Moreover, the constellation is arranged in the sky in such a way that it appears to be opposing the onrushing bull, the constellation of Taurus. The bull Taurus may be symbolic of God, whom Orion, like Nimrod, opposed and fought against. Thus, the true identity of Nimrod may have been written in the stars all along, where Orion's mighty hunter before the Lord could be translated as in front of, opposing, or against, in the sense that Orion is opposing God, rather than somehow working for him. In the same way, the term Antichrist can mean either in place of Christ or against Christ. One meaning is merely questionable, whereas the other is clearly more sinister. And since the Hebrew etymology of the word Nimrod is actually we shall rebel, then the sinister mighty hunter against the Lord could become the accepted translation. Orion fulfills the description of both mighty warrior and mighty hunter against the Lord. The question remains, how can a constellation begin his kingdom in Shinar or build cities in Assyria? Key understanding how Orion answers the Nimrod puzzle so completely is the fact that Orion did not actually build the cities. Those who did rule Shinar and who had built Assyria all worshipped and were inspired by the divine constellation of Orion. And Though they had used different names for the constellation, such as Ninurta and Marduk, Orion being a later Greek application for the same constellation, in their minds the same constellation ruled the heavens above and the earth beneath. In that way, though, there were many different earthly Nimrods who had hunted and warred and built. There was but one heavenly Nimrod that ruled the heaven and the earth, unchanging for thousands of years. The religion of Mystery Babylon. The bloodlines of the evil and the good intertwine very closely in the scriptures and in history. Some of the kings of Judah were very good, God-fearing kings, and others were totally depraved and evil. So in the book of Jasher 11:7-8, Nimrod reintroduces Mystery Babylon after the flood. And notwithstanding this, Nimrod but did not return to the Lord, and he continued in wickedness and teaching wickedness to the sons of men. And Mardon, his son, was worse than his father and continued to add to the abominations of his father. And he caused the sons of men to sin. Therefore, it is said, from the wicked goeth forth wickedness. So let's look at the false doctrines of what the doctrines of Mystery Babylon actually are. Portions of the religion of Mystery Babylon were in existence before the flood and were reinstituted by Nimrod and, according to legend, his wife Semiramis, when they were ruling in Babylon. It was in the city of Babylon that Satan, through Nimrod, promoted idolatry shortly after the flood. So as Randall Carlson points out in his video about Orion, and we have Mithras depicted here in a later time, hunting the bull, the mighty hunter, and he stabs the bull in the shoulder, which represents the Pleiades in Taurus. We have the Taurid meteor shower represented here. And then in ancient Egypt, we also have Hathor, the goddess Hathor represented in the bull. Now, when we go back and look at that story, the cow is represented as a bull. It's a androgynous bull. It's both female and male. We have Hathor represented as the Pleiades. We have Hathor represented as Venus. The bull representing the moon. We have this Islamic symbol here, the crescent moon, Hathor, the cow, goddess. And then we have Venus, the pentagram star with the moon. And then we go back to Freemasonry. We've got the moon or crescent moon associated with the Pleiades. So I believe that this Taurid meteor shower was associated with, perhaps instigated the planet Venus's arrival in our solar system, causing the deluge. And this is why we have this winged disc, this third pillar here, which is represented as the bright morning star, Lucifer or Venus, as being the way back to Eden, the way back to the antediluvian world or heaven for the children of Cain. And when we see Taurus, the bull, I can't help but think of the red heifer sacrifice. And I'll just read here about what is the sacrifice of the red heifer and how does it relate to Christ. So the red heifer is another symbol of Christ's sacrifice. Like the red heifer, Jesus was without blemish. He was sinless. He spoke without malice, God's spotless sacrifice. The ashes of a red heifer were needed in order to attain the Old Testament law's requirements for purification from death. Anyone who came in contact with the corpse was considered unclean. Red heifers are reddish-brown cows. It was to be without defect or blemish and should have never carried a yoke. As the only sacrifice in the law to specify the color of the animal or to be done outside of the city gates, the sacrifice of the red heifer was distinct from others because a female animal was involved. In the same way that Jesus was crucified outside the city gates and the red heifer was sacrificed outside the city gate on the Mount of Olives, Numbers 19:4. Then Eleazar the priest is to take some of the red heifer, blood on his finger and sprinkle it 7 times towards the front of the tent of meeting. The verse describes the slaughtering of a red heifer. Priest Eleazar was responsible for overseeing the ritual outside the Israelites' camp. Eleazar was to sprinkle some of the animal's blood 7 times at the front of the tabernacle after it had been killed. A man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and put them in a ceremonially clean place outside the camp. They are to be kept by the Israelite community for use in the water of cleansing. It is for purification from sin. Numbers 19:9. Red heifers also represent Christ's sacrifice for sin on behalf of believers. It is yet another representation of Christ's sacrifice. In the same way the red heifer was to be without blemish, so was Jesus. The heifer was sacrificed outside the camp. Numbers 19:3. Christ died outside Jerusalem. Hebrews 13:11-12. It is the sacrifice of Christ that saves us from the penalty of corruption, of death, just as ashes of the red heifer cleanse people from the contamination of death. When we look at this red heifer sacrifice, we see the golden calf that the Israelites built in the wilderness or in the shadow of Mount Sinai, and wonder perhaps that there was more to the fact that they wanted a cow or a calf representing Hathor, not necessarily because it was from Egypt, but we have this association with the cow, the Pleiades, the torrid meteor shower, and the flood destruction. And then we have these Days of the Dead. And as I like to say, a lot of these days of worship on Halloween or around this time included human sacrifice. And we could see in the making of the golden calf a returning to this fear of coming under destruction and needing a sacrifice to the cow or the Pleiades to stop destruction rather than being obedient to God. I've heard stories or seen talks on BitChute from people who say that there were children who were abused in Windsor Castle by the royal family and these aristocratic families who hold Halloween as a very high occult festival, and that this is a day of human sacrifice for these people. We know that the Druids sacrifice people at Halloween. So in Halloween, Illuminati symbols sacrifices souls and the meaning of Samhain. So today we'll consider a fresh analysis of the Illuminati pagan holiday known as Halloween and its symbols, sacrifice and visitation of spirits, as well as its involvement in the Illuminati agenda. We'll reveal deeper understanding of this controversial holiday. Halloween, aka Samhain, is venerated by witches and the Church of Satan, which begs for further investigation. When we research it, we find a multitude of origin stories and cultural myths regarding Halloween. There are tie-ins to blood sacrifice, to the horned deity of Moloch. So Moloch was a bull. Now, when we have Nimrod, he hunted the bull and he wore its horns and head as a mask. So, some say that Moloch was a representation of Nimrod. It could have also just been a perversion or a rotting of the story of the Taurus being wounded by Orion, the hunter constellation, and these people's fear of being destroyed again by God's wrath as he destroyed the antediluvian civilizations. It says divination and the behalf in wandering souls of the dead. Much like the rest of our cultural norms, this day of celebration appears to have much darker roots. In an attempt to remove prior satanic panic, frenzied theories, join along as I shed a bit more light on some of the Illuminati theories behind Halloween. So, the Golden Bough. In James George Fraser's The Golden Bough, Study of Magic and Religion, he describes a similar commemoration with Samhain as the ritual for the new year. In ancient Ireland, a new fire used to be kindled every year on Halloween or the eve of Samhain, and from this sacred flame all the fires of Ireland were rekindled. Such a custom points strongly to Samhain or All Saints' Day, the 1st of November, as New Year's Day, since the annual kindling of a new fire takes place most naturally at the beginning of the year, in order that the blessed influence of the fresh fire may last throughout the whole period of 12 months. So, this is tying in with the Pleiades again. We know that the Pleiades brings in the new year and the harvest, and it finishes the harvest as well. This only further cements the idea that the day is ritualistic in nature. Some claims the time period of October 29th through to November 1st represents a covert time period for conducting blood sacrifices to certain deities of paganism. We also have the Hebrew New Year happening in October. So, another circumstance of great moment which points to the same conclusion is the association of the dead with Halloween. Not only among the Celts but throughout Europe, Halloween, the night which marks the transition from autumn to winter, seems to have been of old the time of year when the souls of the departed were supposed to revisit their old homes in order to warm themselves by the fire and comfort themselves with the good cheer provided for them in the kitchen or the parlour by the affectionate kinsfolk. So here we have ancestor worship, we have the returning of souls from the dead, possibly antediluvian souls or deep-bodied spirits, demons. And we have, again, the beginning of the year and the end of the year. The beginning of man or after the flood, and the end of man with the judgment day. Many myths about human sacrifice appear when researching this topic, and Wikipedia consolidates a few Irish mythologies as follows. Some tales may suggest that offerings of sacrifice were made at Samhain. In Liber Gabala Érenn, a book of invasions, each Samhain the people of Nemad had to give 2/3 of their children, their corn and their milk to the monstrous Fomorians. The Fomorians seem to represent the harmful or destructive power of nature, personifications of chaos, darkness, death, blight and drought. This tribute paid by Nemad's people may represent a sacrifice offering at the beginning of winter when the power of darkness and blight are in the ascendant. According to later Dicensius and the Annals of the Four Masters, which were written by Christian monks, Samhain in ancient Ireland was associated with a god of or idol called Crom Cruach. The text claims that the firstborn child would be sacrificed to the stone idol of Crom Cruach. They say the king Tigernmus and 3/4 of his people died while worshipping Crom Cruach their one Samhain. The Celts were alleged to have sacrificed humans and animals in large bonfires, like balefires or bone fires that they are, or balefires in honor of the horn god Baal. So the horn god, again, the cow, Moloch. They did this to try breaking the spell of witches, which runs somewhat counter to the traditional story of the Druid Wicker Man burning, in which they'd offer a sacrifice to the gods in a large wooden man, or the aforementioned Wikipedia myths. Fraser's studies suggest that these were just regular people, but rather witches that were being sacrificed. So we can see all this ignorance here from the people, that they felt that they needed to sacrifice a human to cover their sins so that they wouldn't receive destruction. So another connection here is that the sacrifice to the horned god. In pagan cultures, they worship the stag god because it represents the hunt and the animal giving up its life in order to keep others alive. He is the consort to the Wicca triple goddess, which is also focused on during Samhain through the crone goddess.
I just think it's really interesting to add here that the Edomite god was a three-horned goddess. The picture here shows an image depicting with horns or antlers are found in many different religions across the world. In Egypt, the mother goddess Hathor is commonly depicted as a cow goddess with head, horns, but this figurine is rather unique in that it has three horns, which may represent a triune deity. Three horns generally indicates a goddess. This sculpture was unearthed at an Edomite shrine in Negev. So that's also in the Petra area, or the Nabateans. And King Herod was Edomite and his mother was a Nabatean. But, they're pretty much the same people. They're a mix of Arab, Edomite, and Phoenician. And they worked the silk or Spice Kings Road trading routes. Fraser elaborated more on the idea of sacrifice through fire, technically referred to as the Holocaust, in which he associates many traditions of similar nature. Some of these are from pagan cultures, which would support the idea that they would sacrifice a human to a pagan deity and not a practice for burning witches. So now in the fire festivals which we are discussing, the pretense of burning people is sometimes carried so far that it seems reasonable to regard it as mitigated survival of an older custom of actually burning them. Thus, in Aachen, we saw the man clad in pea straw act so cleverly that the children really believe he is burned. At Jumigus in Normandy, man clad in all green, who bore the title of the Green Wolf, was pursued by his comrades, and when they caught him, they feigned to fling him upon a midsummer bonfire. Similarly, at the Beltane fires in Scotland, and the pretended victim was seized and a show made of throwing him into the flames, and for some time afterwards people affected to speak of him as dead. Again, in the Halloween bonfires of north-eastern Scotland, we may perhaps detect a similar pretensing custom observed by a lad of lying down as close to the fire as possible and allowing the other lads to leap over him. Thinning the veil. They say that veil is the thinnest on October 31st, and it seems there is a belief in spirits being able to cross over between our worlds and theirs. The 3 days surrounding Samhain are the most potent times of the year for divination and sacrifice for this reason. Since the veil between worlds is thinnest, we can see easily into the realms of spirit and fairy. The witches and pagans believe that death and life go hand in hand. We cannot have one without the other, and both should be celebrated. Letting go of lost ones let us open the door for something new, which is why the crone goddess is worshipped during Halloween. This is one of the Wicca triple goddess's deities who is depicted in the Old Woman. And I'd just like to remind of 2 Peter 3:7. But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. And I'll read the whole chapter. It says, verse 3, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers walking after their own lusts, saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the Father fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. For this they willingly are ignorant of that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was being overflowed with water perished. But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, the one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day.
The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is longsuffering to us ward, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burnt up. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of person ought ye be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hasting unto coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth wherein dwelling righteousness. Wherefore, beloved, seeing that ye look for such things, be diligent that ye may be found of him in peace, without spot and blameless. So what's really interesting is in the Exodus story, we have Aaron making and sacrificing to the golden calf. The people sacrificed to this image, the image of Hathor or Venus, the Pleiades. And then we have Jesus, who says to the Pharisees, Ye are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. And, it's kind of an interesting parallel, because we have this priesthood in the time of Jesus representing the Levitical priesthood of Aaron, and they sacrificed Jesus outside the city like the red heifer, and they sacrificed their brother like Cain, the devil, the first murderer. Cain, they are the seed of the serpent, they are the seed of Cain's children, and he murdered his brother. He sacrificed his brother instead of sacrificing an animal. Genesis 3:15, and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and it shall bruise his heel. So we have this connection with the pyramids and Orion and Orion's belt, the mighty builders, the mighty hunter that hunts the bull. And I'm just wondering if, the pyramids were built before the flood. Perhaps the mighty hunter was originally Cain and the city of Cain that was re-established by Nimrod. So I think it's kind of interesting when we see the depiction of Orion that, in later times he's depicted with a shield or a crossbow, even a sword. But in ancient times, in Homer's Odyssey, he was actually depicted with a club in his hand. So Orion is mentioned in the oldest surviving works of Greek literature, which probably date back to the 7th or 8th century BC, but which are the products of an oral tradition with origins several centuries earlier. In Homer's Iliad, Orion is described as a constellation, and the star Sirius is mentioned as his dog. In the Odyssey, Orion is essentially the pinnacle of human excellence in hunting. Odysseus sees him hunting in the underworld with a bronze club, a great slayer of animals, and the most handsome of the earthborn. In the works of his days, Hesiod, Orion is a constellation whose rising and setting with the sun is used to reckon the year. In Genesis chapter 4, we have where Cain kills Abel. It says, and verse 8, and Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. I don't know, perhaps it's just me trying to put two and two together, but, this picture here of Cain slaying Abel kind of looks a bit like Orion with his club. Canaan in the Strongest Concordance means son of Ham. It's from Cana, humiliated. Kenan, a son of Ham, who also the country inhabited by him, Canaan, merchant or traffic, which is really interesting. The Canaanites are merchants or traffickers. Cain, on the other hand, as in Cain and Abel, is Kayin, sounds Chinese, Kayin, a city in southern Judah. The proper name of people, location, proper name masculine. The exhaustive is the same as Kayin, with a play upon affinity of Quana. Kajin, the name of the first child, also of a place in Palestine. A spear. So the word Cain comes from the origin of Kayin, which means a spear, from Quan in the original sense of fixity, a lance as striking fast spear. And what's interesting is that we have Orion with his sword or spear, and we have St. George spearing the dragon, and we also have the man of the mountain who has a spear. The man of the mountain has to be killed by means of a dart, and then he dies and he groans and moans, according to Louis Ginsberg's The Legend of the Jews. So you have to sever his navel string by means of a dart or a spear, which kind of ties in with this rebus image, which is the first Adam, or who the man of the mountain is, one of the versions of Adam, on this pyramidical mountain standing on top of the dragon. So according to the ancient Near East history or mythology on Orion, in ancient Egypt, the stars of Orion were regarded as a god called Sar. Because Orion rises before Sirius, the star whose heliacal rising was the basis for the solar Egyptian calendar, Sar was closely linked with Sopdet, the goddess who personified Sirius. The god Sopdu is said to be the son of Sar and Sopdet. Sar is syncretized with Osiris, while Sopdet is syncretized with Osiris, mythological wife Isis. In the pyramid text, from the 24th and the 23rd century BC, Sar is one of many gods whose form the dead pharaoh is said to take in the afterlife. So here we have this connection with, as I was saying, the mother, father, child religion, the goddess Isis and the god Osiris, and the child Sar or Horus. So where did the Egyptians get this concept of Orion and the tri-god system and the pyramids being built in the image of Orion's belt? And, is it possible that this mother, father, goddess religion is coming from the antediluvian world, and what it is teaching is that the line of salvation is through the line of Cain and the serpent seed opposed to the line of Seth? It's a rotting of the story of the salvation being through the Messiah as old as history. This is what Nimrod taught in his religion, and that he was the Messiah, and this is the original understanding of the Antichrist, or the anti-Messiah, the person who declares themselves as God on earth and the Messiah for all people. This is who I believe the Bible is talking about when it depicts Lucifer. In Revelation 12, we have the woman who is pursued by the seven-headed dragon. And, the seven-headed dragon is considered to be Satan cast out of heaven. He takes a third of the stars of heaven with him. And if we look at it in the symbolism of perhaps the 7 stars of the Pleiades being Taurid, meteor shower, the woman being Venus, the virgin who's pregnant with the child, ready to give birth. And we have this potentially have the story of Jesus' future foretold in the stars, which is like the Mazzaroth, as it was the story of Jesus, and what was to come was as old as mankind, or the fall of mankind itself. It's been known since the fall of man that God gave them the promise of this redemption, and that pagan societies have tried to reenact this. We have the depiction of St. George who spears the dragon, and it kind of reminds me of this story of the spear of Mithras spearing the bull, and at the feet of the bull was a serpent or the dragon, and this spear going into the bull's shoulder where the Pleiades was, and perhaps there's some kind of hidden message in the 7-headed dragon, and the spearing of the dragon being the Pleiades, or the 7 stars, that is showing something, destruction coming from this Taurid meteor shower as it did in the past. I mean, the Bible refers to the dragon as Pharaoh being the great dragon, as the king of Babylon being the dragon. It also talks about the dragons in the wilderness of Edom. And then we have Nimrod, who is said to have been the mighty hunter that kills the wild beast and wears its head as a mask and dances with the horns on his head. And this is where we get the god Moloch from. So by the time we get to the book of Revelation, and we have the dragon represented again, the dragon in the end times being destroyed, and in Revelation 12 we see the dragon coming against the woman and trying to devour her child, which is an obvious depiction of Mary and Jesus, the birth of the Messiah, and King Herod trying to murder the children of Judea to destroy the Messiah. So is there a lot more symbolism here in Revelation 12 than the real life story of the birth of the Messiah and what actually happened? And then we have this mythological or ancient story of the destruction of the antediluvian people through Noah's flood, which quite possibly was due to the Taurid meteor shower and the story of the Pleiades. The dragon will be destroyed by the same event that destroyed the antediluvian world. Here we have the dragon of the City of London with the St. George's Cross as its shield. We know that the St. George's Cross is represented by a lot of these occultish elite groups, and I've done another talk on that on Georgia. But I think the St. George Cross also represents the Inanna star, which is Venus. Here we have the St. George's Cross represented with the 8-pointed star of Inanna. And this is an image used by the Order of the Dragon, which I believe was established by the father of the man who inspired the story of Dracula. And we have the cross, or the star, the winged disc star, the dragon, the Oribus, the serpent Oribus with the St. George's cross. It's the Order of the Dragon was created by the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund in 1408. Created to be like the St. George Order from 1318, the order was created while Sigismund was still reigning as King of Hungary. The order was originally created as a form of protection for the royal family. Since his order was based on a religious order, it had a mandate for the members to defend the cross and fight against the enemies of the church. I'm sure that it was nothing to do with that. So in 1431, King Sigismund summoned a number of vassals and princes to Nuremberg in order to bring them into the Order of the Dragon. He thought of these princes and vassals as useful in either political or military alliances. One of the ones who was summoned was Vlad the Impaler, Vlad the Impaler's father. After Vlad pledged into the Order of the Dragon, Sigismund gave Vlad his word that he would support Vlad's ambitions to the Wallachia Principality. Everyone could see that Vlad was really proud of being brought into the order, as he is minting coins with a curled dragon symbol of the order. These are some of the original members of the Order of the Dragon. I just want to know why this guy has his eye closed and one eye open, and it's his left eye. Oswald von Wolkenstein, and his portrait is pictured with the medals of the Order of the Dragon. And we have King Charles, who prides himself as being a descendant of Vlad the Impaler, Dracul, or the Dragon, who was a member of the Order of the Dragon. So, according to the prophetic Mazzaroth, the Gospel in the Stars, according to Josephus, the constellations were aligned by Adam, Seth, and Enoch. Their original purpose was to write the Gospel in the sky, a prophetic record of the life and mission of Yeshua Messiah, or Jesus Christ. I don't like using Yeshua, as we know it's associated with Metatron. This is the amazing story of the prophetic Mazzaroth, the true origin of the zodiac. Most Christians are taught to shun astrology and shy away from anything having to do with zodiac. These two ancient astral concepts are usually viewed with contempt and disdain by most Christians, but the truth is the zodiac Hebrew Mazzaroth is much older than the art of astrology, though the later, especially in its modern form, has no significance whatsoever for today's Christian. This is not true concerning the zodiac. Few people are aware of this astounding fact. The original zodiac of antiquity has always had one major focal point, that being the life and mission of Jesus Christ. This assertion must be revelatory to most astrologers as well, for the modern meaning of the 12 signs of the zodiac have become fairly entrenched, and these meanings have nothing to do with Jesus Christ. In fact, most astrologers seem to have a very profound anti-Christian bias in favor of the occult. However, it has become very clear to me that the Messiah-based symbolism of the original zodiac is still represented by most of the 12 signs, as well as the 36 decan sub-signs that go in tandem with these signs. Some of these pictographical signs have changed over the millennia, but most of them still retain their original pictography. In this research, we will go back in time, covering a span of 6,000 to 7,000 years, to discover the origin of the zodiac, the prophetic Mazzaroth. What emerges from an intense close-up study of the oldest constellation is a very consistent, unwavering prophetic outline of the life and mission of Jesus Christ on our planet Earth. In addition to the signs and decans that share the symbol, we also find the names of the stars that are contained within the various constellations amplify this Christian symbol. I have hesitated from publishing this information primarily because it cuts against the grain of the strong anti-astrological sentiment within Christianity. But the evidence for the prophetic Mazzaroth is quite overwhelming, as you will see from the associations cited below. The evidence is virtually undeniable. You must bear in mind the zodiac of Adam does not have the same components as modern astrology. The two are completely separate systems, although the latter is loosely based upon the former. In a nutshell, it can be said the zodiac is the gospel of the sky. According to Joseph Seuss, the zodiac was conceived and designed by the biblical patriarchs Adam, Seth, and Enoch for the express purpose of 1. Maintaining a prophetic countdown towards the coming of Jesus Christ, including his function at both Advents, and 2. Providing a symbolic representation of Christ's relationship to his people Israel, not to be confused with the Jews. It will come as tremendous surprise to most Christians that the zodiac has its origin in the minds of biblical patriarchs, and further yet, that the 12 signs and their deacons all represent various stages in the life of Christ and his mission as our Messiah. In addition, you will see the zodiacal sign also symbolize some of the other notable characters in the Bible narrative. In many cases, the constellation represent literal passages taken straight from the Bible. For example, zodiac serpent, which represents the encompassing 1/3 of the night sky, is signified as the former archangel Lucifer, who rebelled against God and took 1/3 of the heavenly host with him in that rebellion. Now, let's not forget that there are 3/3, and when we look in Isaiah, we have Assyria, Egypt, and Israel being 3 different parts to that whole sky, obviously. The goat or Capricorn represents Jesus as the scapegoat for Israel's sins. The sign Virgo represents the virgin birth. Leo represents Jesus as the Lion of Judah, the King of Kings, ruler of the earth, at his second coming. So the first Bible researcher to notice that there is a correlation between the signs of the zodiac and the drama of the Messiah was Joseph Seuss. His book, The Gospel in the Stars, or Primeval Astronomy, first published in 1882, was not the bestseller. Needless to say, in Seuss's time, the prevailing mindset of Christianity was against what was understood as astrology. There was little interest in Seuss' novel concept, and no doubt his thesis was met with either scoffing or indifference. From our perspective, Joseph Seuss was at least 120 years ahead of his time. In the preface of his book, Seuss says the first suspicion that the original constellations may perhaps have come from a divine or prophetic source was impressed upon the writer's mind in connection with his studies of the marvelous wisdom embodied in the Great Pyramid of Giza. It would be fair to say that even in the mid-1800s, many scientists who studied the Great Pyramid found that its construction and design revealed a far greater knowledge of science and mathematics than was commonly ascribed to the ancient world. All of these researchers, including those of the 20th century and these years 01 to 09 of the 21st century, have concluded that whoever built the Great Pyramid was expert with mathematical constants of pi and phi, also known as the Fibonacci series and the golden section. Even today, our school children are taught that Pythagoras discovered the value of pi, but that is incorrect. Pythagoras admitted that he learned it from the Egyptians, and the Egyptians in turn learned this mathematical science from an even earlier civilization. Something was going on in the ancient world that boggles the mind of modern man. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years." Genesis 1:14. Could the expression for signs be literally interpreted as meaning zodiacal signs? What Joseph Seuss did was to extensively research the various zodiacs of Egypt, India, Samaria, Babylon, Arabia, etc., in order to determine which symbols were used to represent the original constellations and which were therefore the oldest. He found that the Greek and Roman symbols had obviously been borrowed from the above-mentioned earlier zodiacs. Also, wherever the later zodiacs diverged from the earlier ones, the signs or symbols lacked the overall plan or thematic consistency of the earlier ones. What Seuss found was that the origin of the symbology predated the biblical flood. The symbology was geographically centered in Mesopotamia and dated back to the time of Adam, which would take us back 4,000 to 5,000 BC. Mesopotamia was where the Adamites, known as the Hebrews, originated, although the Adamites inhabited Mesopotamia, India, and the Tarim basin of Mongolia before Noah's flood. They were driven out of Mesopotamia briefly until the flood dissipated. The Hebrews emerged after the flood when our ancestors Heber moved into the territory with his people. Heber was born 5 generations after Noah. These Hebrews had extensive social interaction reaching as far as east as India, as far west as Britain, as far south as Egypt, and also to some extent even north to China, where a remnant of white Adamites still exists even today in Xinjiang province of southwestern Mongolia. It must be understood that the astronomer priests of these early nations were extremely interested in each other's work, just as today's astronomers are. Omens and portents in the sky were of immense importance to the sky watchers, and if someone were to correctly predict an event based upon portents in the skies, whether they held astrological implications, comets of doom, eclipses, or other heavenly symbolism, the word circulated quickly if someone's prediction had come true. In terms of the ancient world, aside from the usual news of wars, royal births, deaths, notable people, astronomical news was big news. Probably the first question a skeptic would ask is, if all of this is true, then why doesn't the Bible contain more references to the constellations or to astrology? The answer to this question is twofold. Most of the ancient texts, which were intended for public instruction, contain little or no astronomical information. Astronomy was the science of that time, and the astronomer priests kept their profession to themselves. The same is still true of astrology, which became a separated discipline from astronomy during the Middle Ages. Devoid of ideology, astrology can be seen as a very sophisticated discipline of comparative statistics, which with star and planet positions correlated to earthly events. Number 2, the Old Testament, which is a compilation of ancient texts by many Hebrew authors, has undergone a tremendous editorial process, much of which was politically and religiously motivated. Throughout history, religious leaders have sought to distance the common man from scriptural understanding. Often these religious leaders did not practice what they preached. For example, it is known that many popes have had their own personal astrologers, while at the same time they have publicly condemned astrology. The big question is, what did they know that they didn't want other people to know? The Old Testament consists of 3 main disciplines: history, ethics, and prophecy. Whatever scientific information there is within the pages is scattered among the various books, and these statements have to be compared to natural history and recorded history for accuracy. When one diligently searches the scriptures for such history, we find that there are numerous statements made about physical realities. It is the fundamentalist Judeo-Christian interpretation which disagrees with natural history and the earth sciences. Mainstream Christianity can be said to be anti-scientific, but because it teaches a view of history that is opposed to natural science. 2 perfect examples are the flood theory and the evolution fable. So the fact that the Bible does contain a wealth of astrological and astronomical information, if you care to look closely and objectively, the extra-biblical Hebrew and Christian literature which has been passed down to us in parallel with the Bible contains a literal goldmine of astronomical knowledge. Thus, it must be stated categorically that astrology in the original sense of the term is a fundamental part of the Bible. Indeed, the Magi would have never located the Christ child, nor would they have known of the prophecies concerning him were they not skilled astrologers, astronomer priests. Now, it's said that the Magi were actually Zoroastrian followers from Iran, and that's pretty highly possible if we look at, as I've got into the Zoroastrian religion and the symbolism which we know as the star of Inanna or Venus. And if we look into this concept that Venus is related to the Pleiades and the Great Flood, then there was a good reason why they were watching the stars. Referring to the Greek and Roman zodiac, Science tells us Al-Bamaza attributes the invention of both zodiac to Hermes, and Hermes, according to Arab and Egyptian authorities, was the patriarch Enoch. Josephus and the Jewish rabbis affirm that the starry law had its origin with the antediluvian patriarchs Seth and Enoch. This equation of Hermes with Enoch, the Adamite patriarch and scribe, cast an entirely new light upon these ancient days. This means undoubtedly that Enoch was a highly skilled and learned man in the ancient art of astral science, and thus internationally revered for his knowledge and wisdom. As is frequently the case of these ancient sages, different cultures knew them by different names and titles. Only by carefully cross-referencing ancient records can we discover that the Enoch of the Adamites was the same as the Hermes of the Egyptians. Science felt perfectly assured that this indication was accurate. Now, Seth was the son of Adam, who lived 930 years. Anyone who had sufficient time could ostensibly draw a few pictures in the sky and give them meaning. Genesis 2:19-20 tells us that Adam was engaged in the naming of various species of animals, beasts, and birds. Adam would thus have been the first nomenclator and biologist. It is not a huge nomenclator and biologist. It is not a huge step to suggest that Adam also designed constellations, named various stars. Science goes on to assert that both the zodiac and the alphabet were developed in conjunction with one another, so that the development of writing was closely connected with the scientific development of record keeping and notation with respect to astronomy and the construction of observatories and monuments. Modern archaeology completely underestimates the accumulated wealth of scientific knowledge that was processed by these astronomer priests. They argue that these temples and monuments such as Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid were mere tombs in which ritual dances, sacrifices, and pagan rites were performed. I can say with certainty that it is these present-day archaeologists who are imputing to the ancient past their own preconceived notions due to their ignorance of prehistory. It is they who are out of touch with reality. Their precious fable of evolution demands a steady increase of abilities and talents. The actual record of geology and archaeology confirm that numerous catastrophes have beset the planet and great civilizations were destroyed in their time. We would expect to find that the zodiac of Adam was in common use in those days, and its utility for navigation on the high seas at night time cannot be underestimated. Navigators who were familiar with the constellations could easily stay on course. So, astrology in the 12 tribes of Israel. Few doctrinaire Christians would want to admit this, but the 12 tribes of Israel represent 12 signs of the zodiac. The 4 cardinal signs are each represented by the 4 leading tribes. Dan is Scorpio, although this tribe took the sign of the eagle or phoenix for its emblem. Judah is Leo and the lion. Reuben is Aquarius, the man, and Ephraim is Taurus, the bull. After the exodus from Egypt, it was common for Israel's 12 tribes to camp in a square formation with 3 tribes on each side of the square. When they formed the camp, the 4 leading tribes, Reuben, Dan, Ephraim, and Judah, stationed themselves at the cardinal points, and the other tribes assumed their position on either side of the lead tribes. Each tribe had its own coat of arms, emblazoned on the flags and battle shields. These may also directly related to the signs of the zodiac. The tradition of coat of arms is still present among the Anglo-Saxons today, providing more proof that we, not the Jews, are the true and only descendants of the 12 tribes. The Jewish people have absolutely no tradition of heraldry. So in the book of Revelation, we encounter a passage concerning 4 beasts, and the first beast was like a lion, the second beast was like a calf, and the third beast had a face of a man, and the fourth beast was like the flying eagle. Revelation 4:7. Here again we have the 4 cardinal signs: Leo, the lion; Taurus, the bull; Ephraim, Aquarius, the man; Reuben, and Scorpio, the eagle; Dan. With regard to Scorpio, the eagle has been replaced by the pictograph of a scorpion, but as you will see later, the eagle still remains as one of Scorpio's deacons. So the constellation of Virgo, of the Virgin, Krishna, the divine incarnation of the Hindu mythology, was born of a virgin 100 years before Christ. An altar was found in Gaul with the inscription, "To the Virgin who is to bring forth, and the maiden in the sign in the holder and bringer of an illustrious seed. In her hand is the spiker, the ear of wheat, the best of seed." And the spiker indicated by the brightest star in the whole constellation. In addition to the spiker, in one hand she bears a branch of the other. The ancient name of the stars in this constellation emphasizes this, showing along with that of the seed, Al-Zamak, Al-Azal, and Sabulian mean the shoot, the branch, the ear, the wheat. Given that the Bible repeatedly uses plants such as wheat and tares to symbolize people, we are not surprised to find similar symbolism, tribes or clans. It can be easily seen that the spiker is the seed of the woman and the most excellent seed, Jesus Christ, of the family branch of the tribe of Judah. Note that the Old Testament refers to the future Messiah as the root of Jesse, the branch of David, and one who is to be born of a virgin. The symbolism of the ancient constellation of Virgo and the related biblical symbolism stand in virtual conformity. Could it be that the authors of the Zodiac and the authors of the Old Testament were the same group of people, Adam, Seth, and Enoch? Did Moses, as a Hebrew scribe, acquire his knowledge and inspiration from written documents handed down from them? The Lord Krishna of Hinduism may or may not have been born of a virgin. What is important here is that the legend and prophecy of the one who is to be born of a virgin was, at the time of Lord Krishna, already accepted astrological symbolism. Krishna and the others may have borrowed this symbolism for themselves in order to enhance their position. And this is what I'm saying, it's Nimrod who has stolen this story for himself and made himself the Antichrist, or instead of Christ, he's made himself the one born of the Virgin. And all of the other Nimrods or Lucifers after him are doing the same thing, saying that they are born of this family or aristocratic line. But we know that Jesus called them the seed of their father, the devil. He was a murderer from the beginning, and this is a reference to Cain. Critics of Christianity have tried to lessen the significance of the Messiah virgin birth by pointing out that many sages prior to Christ had made such a claim. But were they the object of the Mazzaroth prophecy? Being born of a virgin would thus have been a form of one-upmanship and assumed bragging point based on a known prophecy lacking this knowledge of the antiquity of the zodiac and its meaning. Secular critics of Yeshua Messiah finally assume that the story of Christ's virgin birth is simply the retelling of an old legend of Jesus Messiah. Falsely assume that the story of Christ's virgin birth is simply the retelling of an old legend. There has never been a shortage of false claimants to any major office. It is not the case that Christianity borrowed the idea of the virgin birth from Krishna or from the Epic of Gilgamesh. It is the other way around. Earlier pretenders stole the idea from the prophetic Mazzaroth, whose central theme is Jesus Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth. So just point out that the first deacon, Serpens the serpent is shown struggling with Orpheus. Serpens is depicted as a snake stretching out to grab Corona, the crown, from the previous deacon. The serpent wants this crown for itself, but Orpheus is holding the serpent back, preventing it from reaching the crown. The brightest star of the pictograph is Alia, embedded in the serpent's neck, meaning the accused. The same star is also called Unuk, which means the encompassing, presumably representing the serpent's great influence and power. The Bible confirms imagery by identifying Satan as the prince of this world. So Orpheus, the serpent holder, is said to be lifting up one foot as if recoiling from the sting of the serpent, while at the same time he is trying to crush the head of the serpent. This is the exact depiction in Genesis 3:15, where the serpent is told by Yahweh, and the seed of the woman, meaning the Adamic bloodline, shall bruise thy Nakesh, the serpent in the garden head of thou shalt bruise his heel. This refers to the seed line of Cain. the offspring of the Jewish people who have historically pursued the Adamic race and bruised us from behind like a snake. I recently obtained a copy of Revised English Bible, a combined effort of the Oxford University Press and the Cambridge University Press. Here is that translation of Genesis 3:15. I shall put enmity between you and the woman, between your brood and hers. They will strike at your head, and you will strike at their heel. The imagery of Orpheus and serpents is 100% agreement with this prophecy. So the first deacon, Orion, the glorious prince. Orion is an image very similar to that of Hercules. The difference is that Hercules had some human frailties. Orion does not. Orion is a pure hunter. In his right hand he holds a club. In his left hand he holds up the trophy head of a lion. According to E.W. Bullinger, Orion was from the Hebrew root which means light. So that Orion means coming forth as light. The ancient Akkadian was Urana, the light of heaven. From his book, The Witness of the Stars, Orion is one of the few constellations mentioned by the name in the Bible. In speaking of the divine creator of the heavens and the earth, Job refers to God which maketh Arcturus, Orion, and the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south. Stars of this group include Betelgeuse, meaning the branch coming, Rigel, the foot that crusheth Bellatrix, suddenly destroying, and Al-Mizam, the ruler. The three stars of Orion's belt are called the three kings, which are reference to the Magi. The Magi brought three gifts to the infant Jesus: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These were the gifts commonly given to a potential monarch. In Orion, the promised kingdom and ruler of the Messiah is promised. In the book The Orion Mystery, with regards to symbolism of the pyramid complex of Giza, Robert Bauval and Adrian Gilbert state, I at last understood that we are being told in plain language that the pyramid constructions were to be considered Osiris. As I already knew that the celestial form of Osiris was Sahu, and that this figure corresponded with our modern constellation of Orion, the pyramids were indeed Orion too. The text writers could not have made their intent plainer and more straightforward, and it sustained my theory that the three pyramids of Giza were symbols of Orion's belt. My next step was to find further visual evidence. I had good photograph of the three stars of Orion's belt and was able to place it against the aerial shot of the three Giza pyramids. The correlation was stunning. Not only did the layout of the pyramids match the stars with the uncanny precision, but the intensity of the stars shown by their apparent size corresponded with the Giza group. There were 3 stars, 3 pyramids, 3 Osiris Orion kings. Not only that, but the Nile River lies in relation to the 3 pyramids, as the Milky Way corresponds to Betelgeuse, Bellatrix, and Al-Mizraim. Clearly, the builders of the pyramid complex were trying to tell us something. Remember, the Holy Family had to flee to Egypt to get away from the persecution of Herod. The children of Israel have numerous intimate direction and symbolic relationships to Egypt. The Great Pyramid and the priesthood of On are part of the legacy. On is the short for Enoch. The priesthood of On were established 1,000 years before the Israelites were taken captive in Egypt. The Egyptians called Enoch Hermes. Hermes was the great sage of Egypt, and the priesthood of On was the Egyptian counterpart to the Sethite priesthood of ancient Britain.
So this article comes from the website eurofolkradio.com, and it's titled The Prophetic Mazzaroth, the Gospel in the Stars.
According to this article, Orion in Revelation, Orion is the son of man. The heavenly scroll, the Nazarene Judaism, as also depicted by St. John. In Revelations 14:20, and I looked in the heavens, of course, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud Orion sits atop the Milky Way. One sat like unto the man, son of man, Orion, having in his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle or sword. Here you see Orion riding the clouds of heaven, the Milky Way. So in the Mazzaroth, Orion is actually holding a sword and not a club. So either way, we can see that, They've depicted Nimrod as Orion in secular information, not biblical information, and the origin of the zodiac or the stars comes from the Mazzaroth in its oldest form, which depicts an astrological picture of the salvation of man from the beginning of time. And we have this Antichrist, or this Lucifer spirit, that wants to keep placing itself in the position of Christ, or, as I say, man reaching heaven himself as his own redeemer, or rulers proclaiming themselves as king, or king of kings,
or god kings, or family lines that are related to the gods and therefore have divine right to rule over everyone and everything,
and placing themselves in the prophetic position of Jesus. And, you know, we see Jesus saying that I am the bright and morning star, not these fake kings that have come down through history, re-established after the flood by Nimrod, but I believe it was originally established before the flood by Cain. So we have these 3 pyramids from Egypt, and the 3 main pyramids of the Egyptian plateau. We've got the King's Pyramid, the Queen's Pyramid, and this little one here. And as people have suggested, they represent the belt of Orion. Here's a picture lining up Orion with the 3 pyramids. And, you know, why do we have the Eye of Lucifer depicted as a pyramid? And if we look into the Freemasonic symbolism, that the 3rd pillar, the middle pillar, is the Baphomet, or the Jacob's ladder to heaven, the child of the mother and father, the mother and father being Adam and Eve. And we have this mother, father, child religion that goes back way earlier than Jacob. Actually goes back to Babylon, Nimrod.